So, but this was one of the sheerest. Here, the steps you don't see as much as you do on others, if there were any. Perhaps when it went up, it sort of maybe tilted, because this was like a sheer cliff. So the task was a monumental one, and they blasted it through, and it has a name, and it's called the Douglas Cut. And at the time, to redistribute this blasted out rock, they still had mule trains doing this. Okay, the shovels and the wagons that took the debris away was all mule, drawn by mules, and so it must have been a massive effort. But eventually, by the time 1926 came around, they did manage to get the Palos Verdes Drive all the way around the peninsula, and they had a big parade of people from Redondo Beach and all over that. And this again is in the historic room and in the historic reports from that time. What a big event that was! That thousands of cars came, and they all slowly drove along PV Drive after it was opened. We also it also exposed, the slide there has a little bit of schist sand. Schist is the underpinning or the oldest rock under the peninsula. One of the reasons that most people think we're probably pretty stable for earthquakes, even though there is an earthquake fault right in front of the peninsula. And this schist was formed when the tectonic plates submerged, when the Pacific plate slides under the North American plates. And you have to imagine that. I mean, if this is a Pacific, and the Pacific plate, it slowly goes under here. So as it does that, when it goes under here, and again, you have to think this is not something that happens in a week, okay, millions of years. There's enormous pressure and heat, because these are land masses, okay, that are doing that. And not only does it push up mountains at the same time while it's sliding down here, it also changes the rocks, and the heat changes the rocks, and the schist is a product of that, and it's very hard and very old, and it's called Catalina schist because that's the underpinning of the island of Catalina, and we have some here also because for that same process, and because at one time, of course, we were an island. And simply by corrosion, by wind, weather, and perhaps some of the blasting, whatever, some of that ground up schist is visible down there, and it's sort of greenish. Now the schist has different colors. Mostly it's sort of greenish, but there's also a reddish schist. Sometimes on our walks we can find a reddish color, sometimes a purple. In the canyons of rolling hills, they have some purple, really pretty. It's also a schist. So I assume when they're having these changes, the heat and everything also changes the color, or the minerals that might be in the rock changes the colors. So that's what
people live in those homes.
Yes, city employees, because they belong to the city of Palos Verdes Estates. All right, we stopped here, and I get out of give them a little bit light for the camera. This is another native used to this marine environment called sueda. There's two kinds. There's a kind that is called California sueda. It's up at the viewpoint on Portuguese Point, which is above Abalone Cove Beach. And then there's this kind. And but basically they are used again to the salt air. And the Indians brewed this in sort of a tincture or tea or whatever you called it, and it turns out black, and that's how they decorated their baskets. That's what they used to decorate their baskets. In fact, somebody was asking about the Indians that lived here, and the archaeologists have found Indian middens and signs of Indian habitation. This particular local tribe was called Tongwas. As you went sort of around the coast, they had different names. The villages were often named after the environment. If you had a lot of cactus on the hill, it was called Village of the Cactus. If there might be an oak tree or something, it was called Village of the Oak Tree. If it was near a lake or water, they referred to it as that. And there were usually large family groups, depending on what the environment was, and they all pretty basically lived, of course, off the marine food supply, fishing, mussel shells, snails, whatever the ocean would yield. If they were more on top of the peninsula and so forth, there was a lot of root gathering. The spring flowers that come out in the spring, we have wild hyacinths, and those of you that have gone on our walks before, when in spring we try to go to Forestall where we still have a lot of wildflowers. It's a little blue flower. The bulb is actually not bigger than my thumbnail, but there must have been so many at the time they would actually harvest those, dig them out with digging sticks as Indians do, and have that. Must have been spectacular when all of that was blooming. And perhaps if we're lucky enough in the restored preserves, maybe, you know, these things can all be restored. Watch out, somebody's coming. Give me a chance to. But anyway, they also built plank boats. And most Indian tribes built boats out of reeds, and they're more woven. But the Indians in this area actually built boats out of planks, and they traded with the Catalina Indians. And it's most likely that they made those waterproof by using tar, because you know, we now drill for oil, but there are natural fissures in the ocean floor where oil will come up. And those of you that have lived a long time in California, I remember coming 30 years ago, and on the beaches you often got tarry feet, you know, and the tarry kids come home and it's tar all over the place. And there used to be big lumps, as obviously there aren't very many people, so you found bigger lumps still on them, and you could, you know, soften that and melt it and use that to make baskets watertight. But they also were, and those of you that have traveled in Arizona and so forth, the Indians were able to make really tightly woven baskets. And what they did, the way they heated water or cooked their food, they would heat stones and put them in the water and made it cook that way, because you can't really put a basket on the fire. So that was their method of cooking here in this particular area, in this marine environment. So they had ways. Also, the archaeologists did find Indian middens, which is basically a refuse heap. They found some, particularly ones at Abalone Cove, and there's other places also where we know that they are. And what it is basically a whole huge pile full of shells that they, you know, abalone shells, all the shells that they ate, that's the only thing that survives. Obviously soft stuff doesn't survive, but the shells do survive. And so you get these enormous, presumably the whole village had one heap where they put everything. And those are then later, we can find that and we can say, aha. You know, they also at Abalone Cove Beach, they did find a burial site. But unfortunately, it's a long time ago, and they were unable to explore it further or to have archaeologists come back and really explore that. And so there's only very skimpy information, other than just general, yes, they were there, yes, there's somebody buried there, and that's about it. The other place that they did find Indian indication is actually a very prominent site, and it's when you go around the bend, Rat Beach, just the beginning of Palos Verdes Boulevard, there are apartment houses now. And before they built those, they had an archaeological site, and they were able to dig a while, and they found layers and layers. And the oldest layers where they found human habitation is 6,000 years old. So the Indians were here a long time ago, basically. And then as they explored successive layers, they would find more implements, and they would find an increase in the technology of making tools and so forth, just as archaeologists do all over the world. They could then time it and get information that way. But there may be more stuff, so who knows. Let's walk on. All right, let me tell you a little bit more about the Conservancy. I told you some already, and you know, we also have a children's education program. We established many years ago a third grade nature program where the Conservancy members and parents will go into the classroom, third grade, and tell the kids about the environment, about the rocks, about plants. They have a very nice book where they can see all that. And then the parents, volunteers are trained from our education director, and they go out near their school, no buses, just where they can walk and see all these things in real life. And that has been extremely successful. You can imagine, and third grade is a great age that we one day like to expand to higher grades. but it's a matter, again, of funding and so forth, and getting volunteers to do that. But the school district is very supportive and loves it, and we've done this for many, many years. And again, our main aim in life is to, purchase the rest of available open space, and then we'll probably, be asked by the cities to just restore it, and that will go on for as long as we can possibly hang on, and get funding, get grants, and it's a constant struggle to try to get the grants and to get funding for all of this. But in the meantime, we'll keep up with our walks here, and try to tell. We don't have to tell you in what a wonderful place you live, but perhaps to show you the nooks and crannies that you don't know, and tell you a little bit about, or a lot about, the history and so forth. And there is history here. The peninsula, of course, was purchased by a man called Mr. Vanderlip in 1913, unseen. He's a New York financier, and a 50-member consortium bought this as a real estate investment, the peninsula, and eventually decided, yes, they were going to have a a designed community where everything was regulated, where they would have an artisan village, where houses would be regulated, what plants to plant, where to put the roads, very sort of artistic, Carmel-like environment, and so forth. And as World War II came along, and there were changes in investors and so forth, things went up and down. The interest was lost, funding was lost. Then it was picked up again. It was called the Palos Verdes Project, and went in sort of in jumps, and then eventually the whole thing sort of crashed because of the Depression. But until that happened, which they had a man here, a harbor designer, who then proceeded to design a yacht club right here in Bluff Cove. And what he proposed was that he would have a club facilities, fancy club facilities, way up there on the cliff where you see that tree sticking out. Okay, and then he was going to have a seawall that would shelter these yachts in here, and then he would have an elevator for the yacht owners to get up to their club. And it was just a grandiose scheme that he had planned and designed, and of course it kind of fizzled. But that was another thing of these historic things here in Bluff Cove that went on. And and again,
what was the name of the man who first
Smith.
bought it?
Or who first bought it? Vanderlip. Vanderlip,
Oh.
not built, but Vanderlip.
Okay.
And they still live there. They have, what they did is when they first bought this, the Vanderlip family decided to actually live in Portuguese Bend. And to this day, in Abalone Cove, they have a house there. It also was designed, and the design of the future mansion can be seen. They have a model of it. It's with the Historic Society here in Malaga Cove. But he never got as far. He only built a guest house, and the family came for summer vacation, and they lived in the guest house, thinking one day they were going to build this mansion. And the mansion never came, and to this day, the Vanderlip estate now is the main house. And it is the one that you might be able to see when you go into Portuguese Bend hiking or so forth, that has all the steps that go up to a Grecian Temple, a small white structure like a Grecian Temple, has 160 or so steps that go up there, and they have right and left, as suggested in an Italian villa, they have cypresses, column cypresses going up on the sides. It's very elegant and so forth. And that's still there.
And they live there?
And they lived there, particularly in the summer, and later they lived, and the family is still there to this day. Mrs. Erin Vanderlip is still, but she's in her 80s, I believe. They also had stables and so forth, and but that's in Abalone Cove behind the gates there. The Vanderlips eventually, of course, then the Depression came and all these plans pretty much fizzled. Let me see, what else was I going to tell you? Oh yeah, the kelp beds. Now when we walked down, you could see sort of a matte or not a shiny section off the point, and you can still see sort of brownish. The kelp beds around the peninsula were extensive. They were huge, and the kelp beds, and you may know this, are the nursery of the ocean, basically. The kelp beds harbor the small fish, the eggs, even seals, They have the horned sharks, which is a very benign little shark that lays its egg cases there. Shrimp, probably what should I say, krill, all kinds of. It's a very, very important part of the ocean. And pollution destroyed much of the kelp beds in the